Good evening and welcome to the Kuhn Academy for this installment of AP Government, where we are building responsible voters one video at a time. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about gerrymandering, and we've mentioned this a lot in class, so most of this will be familiar to you, but I just want to make sure to go over some key terms and especially the limitations that the court has placed on gerrymandering. All right, first term we should definitely know is reapportionment. All right, this is also called apportionment, so whether you put the re in front of it is kind of irrelevant. All right, apportionment is really the key term. What's happening here is every 10 years, Congress is doing a population count through the census. All right, that's why it's very important that you fill those census forms out, because that's how we know how many people are in a state and in a given area. And then the House will decide, based on the census, how many House seats a state is going to get. So when we apportion, we are giving House seats to each state. And that number has been frozen at 435 since the Congressional Act of 1929. All right, so that's a perfect example of an informal amendment to the Constitution. All right, so the House will say, here's how many you get, and then that state can do what it wants with those numbers following specific limitations by the court. But the House says, here's how many you get, and then that gets allocated out to each of the houses, all right, or to each of the states. Now, once the states get those numbers, they do redistricting. This is also done every 10 years in accordance with the census. All right, it doesn't have to be done every 10 years. We'll talk about that Wednesday when we get into some of the court cases. Okay, state legislatures do this, and it has to be signed into law by the governor. This determines the size and shape of the districts to comply with how many congressional districts they're going to get. And this is done more and more by computers, as we debated in third hour on Monday. It's on my independent commissions, but most cases the state legislature is in charge of it, as was the case in Illinois. All right, so reapportionment is at the federal level, redistricting at the state level. All right, now gerrymandering is essentially redistricting, but you're doing it with a political purpose. You are trying to help your political party gain seats in the House of Representatives. Also happens at the state level, try and help your party gain seats in the state legislature. Okay, the definition is when you are drawing a district's boundaries. All right, so you draw the boundaries to gain an advantage. You are gaining some kind of advantage in elections, either to help your party out or to help a disenfranchised minority group or a underrepresented minority group try to have more seats. And it is named for a guy named Elbridge Gerry, who long ago drew a district to protect himself as a elected member of the House from Massachusetts, and they said that district looked like a salamander, as you see here. I don't necessarily know where you see the salamander, but I don't think they have this nasty dragon-looking face there, but they said his district looked like a salamander, and he drew it as Elbridge Gerry, so we are forever stuck with the term gerrymandering. All right, and this cartoon has made exams before, and you just simply have to know this is associated with gerrymandering. All right, there's two ways you gerrymander. You can pack, which is where you try to put as many members of one party into one district to limit the amount of seats they can win. Those of you that live in the 14th district, you have been packed. All right, that district is as Republican as you can get, and they took every Republican area they can find, all the way up into Gurnee, by where I live, all the way over across into Antioch, Fox Lake, areas like that, and then down through the western part of Mundelein, all the way down to Kendall County in Illinois. So it's a huge district, but basically it's a who's who of Republican and affluent areas. All right, cracking is where you split the voters of an opposing party into two different districts. Okay, so that way you can limit that voting block, and you're going to draw the line right down the middle, so they're not going to be solidly represented. This happens to minority groups a lot. You might have a typical African American area like this. Rather than make it one congressional district, you'll crack it in half and then put them into a larger district like this. So District 2 and District 3, all right, will both have these minorities be minorities in that area, as opposed to having them be one large group like that. Okay, packing and cracking, and this is totally legal. Okay, as a way of doing it, as long as you comply with the court's limitations. All right, your important court cases to know. The one to know, the granddaddy of them all, is Baker versus Carr. This is on our top 10, top 15 list of court cases to know. Okay, kind of hard to explain, but the bottom line is you need to know that this is one person, one vote for Baker versus Carr. It was decided in 1962, right after a census, and the court basically said that when you draw a district and you do not have the population the same, you are violating the Equal Protection Clause. I could live in a district with 1,000 people, you live in a district with 10,000 people, our votes are not the same. Equal Protection Clause applies there. And basically, why this case is significant is it's the first time the Supreme Court has ever taken a gerrymandering case. Previously, they had always said that gerrymandering was a political question, and they try to stay out of political questions. Those are ones that should be decided by legislatures. But the Warren Court, which we already know is known for civil rights, also is going to push for civil rights here with the gerrymandering. All right. Now, Westbury versus Sanders actually declared a policy in Tennessee to be unconstitutional. Okay, and that's where they had inappropriate districts, not at the federal level, but at the state level. Okay, so the state legislature districts in the urban areas were much bigger than the ones in the rural areas. So they said one person, one vote. That's really the key term to know there, and it's that you have to have equal population in the districts. That is what's key about one person, one vote. Make sure you explain that properly. Reynolds versus Sims is kind of an interesting one. This was in Alabama. You probably won't have to know this one by name, but what happened in this case was Alabama had their state senate determined by counties. So each county got one representative in the state senate. All right, well, let's see if apply that to Illinois. Let's say Lake County got one representative in our General Assembly, and Cook County got one representative. Who would be better off? Yes, it would be us, because we have less people in Lake County than they do in Crook County. So the votes were not equal. Alabama said, well, wait a minute. The U.S. Senate is based on equal representation. Why can't we do that with our counties? Because obviously the rural counties translate Alabama, yes, you guessed it, white as can be, urban areas, a little bit more diverse. Okay, so Alabama wanted to keep it where the rural areas had more power than the urban areas in Alabama, and the Supreme Court argued, and they said that the Senate, all right, this is their ruling, that the U.S. Senate was a political compromise and did not set any future precedents. It was done for expediency and compromise, not to reflect fairness and equality. So kind of interesting there. Shaw versus Reno, that comes along in 1993. And that was, again, after a census, and this was in North Carolina. They said that race cannot be the sole factor, okay? So if you're going to draw a district, race cannot be the sole factor in why you draw that district to get a black or a Mexican person elected, all right? They also said the districts have to be contiguous. They must be touching. You can't have districts in different parts of the states and call it one district. And they created what's called a compactness standard, that the district has to be as compact as possible. Okay, I'm going to show you some maps in class on Wednesday, and we can talk about this further. And then League of United Latin American Citizens versus Perry. Yes, that's the great Rick Perry of Texas, Mr. Vershka and Ms. Gustafson. And basically what happened here was Texas decided to redistrict in 2004, even though they had just done it in 2002. What was the difference? A lot of Republicans got elected to the State House in 2004. They redrew the districts, made them more Republican. I'll show you a map on that to try and help them at the congressional level. It worked, and the Supreme Court said it was perfectly fine because race was not the sole factor. The districts were contiguous, and they were compact. Okay, there's nothing that says you cannot redistrict outside of a 10-year window. And other limits that have been set in minor cases include you cannot dilute the voting strength of a minority group. So kind of that limits cracking if you're trying to dilute a minority group's vote. And communities of interest must be protected. So if you have a community of interest of a Latino area or a Chinese area, you have to make sure that they are lumped together and they vote in the common district. They don't have to be the majority, but you got to keep them together. All right, so that concludes today's Kuhn Academy lesson. Thank you for listening. And remember, we are building responsible voters one video at a time. Thank you.